Sharon. I'm just going to share my screen here. Can you all see it?
Yes. Yeah, that looks fine.
Good. Okay. Right. Thank you, Darren. And as Darren said, we're going to be presenting, this is a two-part talk really, but on some things which are two elements which are maybe very different in some ways, but also have a lot of similarities. As Darren mentioned, I work at the UK Data Service, but today I'm going to be talking from the CESSDA perspective and talking about the CESSDA data access policy. So I will do my part of the talk first, and then I'll hand over to Beate. Okay, so, right. So CESSDA data access policy is really aimed at harmonising standards across the countries and organisations that belong to CESSDA and beyond. And I'm going to talk about the recent update we did of this data access policy within the Metadata Office project. Okay, so many of you, of course, are members of CESSDA and will know about CESSDA, but for those of you who don't, the acronym stands for the Consortium of European Social Science Data Archives. It started in 1976 with just a few archives as an umbrella organisation, really, to bring people together who were doing similar job in similar centres in different countries, with the aim of supporting each other and helping each other with initiatives and challenges. CESSDA went from strength to strength and became an ERIC, or European Research Infrastructure Consortium, in 2017. It currently has 22 member countries, both EU and non-EU members, and 1 observers. And each country nominates a service provider, which is generally an organisation such as the National Data Archive, which may be set in academia, or it may also be part of a national statistical institute. And CESSDA's aim really is to provide a full-scale sustainable research infrastructure, enabling the research community to conduct high-quality research supported and facilitated, and also really to harmonise, where possible, across the organisations of CESSDA. Okay, the data access policy is really an underpinning and guiding document developed to provide common standards across CESSDA service providers and support everyone in achieving them. Obviously, there are many organisations in CESSDA of differing sizes. Some of the larger organisations can support the smaller ones with their resources and experience, but also the larger organisations can maybe benefit from some of the more radical solutions that smaller institutions can put into practice as well. So this is really the underpinning of the data access policy, is to try and harmonise across CESSDA and support service providers in being able to meet the principles that the data access policy pulls down. It was first established in 2016 and with a 5-yearly update cycle. And so it was updated in 21-22 to incorporate the new data landscape. Now, obviously, it would be stating the obvious to say that things have changed a great deal in the last 5 years. We have the fair data principles, the introduction of GDPR, and also the EU's open science policy, which CESSDA has to abide by. The policy also includes some of CESSDA's own recent developments from various projects, such as the CESSDA PID policy, which stipulates that all CESSDA service providers have to include a persistent identifier for their data item. And also, there have been some updates to the CESSDA statutes which needed to be incorporated as well. And this is to really make the policy needs to be relevant to all SPs, regardless of their size and location and capability. Okay, so the changes that we incorporate in version 2, as I mentioned, the FAIR principles and persistent identifiers, and it really concentrated on trying to harmonise data and metadata access, with a focus on metadata harvesting for the CESSDA data catalogue, which I'll return to in just a moment. And for data access, we had to Make sure that there was enough flexibility added so that service providers can obviously follow the laws and practices in their own countries, which are, although they may be EU members, they may be following some quite different regulations, but also still meet the common CESSDA standards that we try to lay down in the data access policy. For the CESSDA data catalogue, the background to this is that currently under development is a common data access filter. The first stage of this will enable users of the catalogue to filter their search results by access method. And it's aimed at helping people find open data across the European catalogues, which they may not be able to find easily elsewhere. So they can go to where the data are held and just download it or access it as they need to. It's very much a work in progress. We've had some delay with it because we've had to wait for an update to DDI 2.6 or DDI codebook for an element to go into the metadata profiles which serve the data access catalogue. At the moment, it will be a two-stage filter, which will cover open data where there are no restrictions at all, and users can freely download or access it, and data where there are some restrictions, and that will cover the whole spectrum from basic registration to use the data right up to secure access. But we're hoping that once we've introduced the successful two-stage data access filter, we will be able to add a lot more granularity into the restricted category as well, so that eventually we will be able to restrict searching to secure access, basic registration access, and so on, as well as enabling easy access to open data. After the policy was drafted, all service providers had a chance to feed back on the new version, and that was really helpful. We were able to ensure in that way that it promotes harmonisation across the next 5 years collaboration, or whenever we come to updating the policy again. Obviously, that depends on the data landscape and any major changes that might follow. Okay. As I have to hand over to Beate shortly for her part of the talk, I'm going to leave it here, and I've just provided some links here to the CESSDA data access policy itself, and also a couple of IASSIST presentations from this year, which covered the managing data access in the data catalogue, and also more detail on the update of the data access policy. Okay, we will be returning just for a discussion at the end, which will be able to revisit this. But if you would like to find out more detail, please have a look at the links, and we'll be providing the slides after the workshop, so you'll be able to revisit them. Okay, well, thank you for listening, everybody, and over to Beate.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I will be talking to you about a framework and contract for international data use agreements on remote access to confidential data. As Sharon said, we will come together on a discussion in the end of it. And you will also see how these two talks, which seem to be not too much linked to one another, are actually linked to one another. So let me first talk to you about the framework. Next slide, please. So I have 3 points I would like to focus on in my talk, and that is a SSHOC work package 5.4. Second is the framework itself, and third, ISDFPN. Next slide, please. So as Darren already said, SSHOC stands for Social Sciences and Humanities Open Cloud, SSHOC project. And that was running from the 1st of January 2019 until the 30th of April 2022. That was Horizon Europe, no, that is now, sorry, that was a Horizon 2020 funded project. And actually it had many work packages, but I was representing the UKDA service in work package 5, Innovations in Data Access, task 5.4, Remote Access to Sensitive Data. And here I would like to point you in the direction of 4 specific deliverables. One is actually the framework and contract for international data use agreements on remote access to confidential data, which I will be talking more about in a minute. I would also like to highlight the white paper on remote access, to sensitive data in the social sciences and humanities, 2021 and beyond. I would further like to draw your attention to the deliverable on the Iran pilot. And here, this will focus on setting up a secure remote connection between two trusted research environments. I understand my colleague Deborah Wiltshire from GESIS will talk more about that later in today's program. And actually the framework D5.9 and the contract template have been used and utilized for setting up that connection between the UK Data Service and GESIS, which happened earlier this year. And finally, I would like to highlight D5.12, the International Secure Data Facility Professionals Network, ISDFPN. Next slide, please. Okay, so the framework and contract for international data use agreements on remote access to confidential data is authored by Matthew Woolard from the UK Data Archive, myself, Libby Bishop from GESIS, and Dana Müller from the IRB in Nuremberg. And the purpose here was to provide and generate a template for a contract to provide international access to confidential microdata. This template is actually based on an existing contract, and this existing contract is between the Research Data Center of the Federal Employment Agency at the Institute for Employment Research, IRB FDZ Nuremberg, Germany. It's a bit of a mouthful. and the UK Data Service at the UK Data Archive, University of Essex. So that is basically the basis for then abstracting to a template. And it provides an important framework for future data use agreements and serves as a generic template that can easily be adapted. And that's the important bit. So you can actually go to it, and I have provided the link, and you can download it, and you can actually amend it according to what is needed for your specific TRE, Trusted Research Environment, or RDC, Research Data Center, etc., whatever you call it. Now, so this actually was done in order to improve the international research landscape and the infrastructure for facilitating international research. And the template is one bit, but also there is extensive commentary provided where you find details on the scope and detail of the contract, noting considerations for changes within particular local circumstances. And it also introduces the 5 SAFEs framework, which Darren has already introduced. It's basically the go-to framework at the moment when you want to allow access to controlled data nationally and internationally. And it actually also captures the relationship between the 5 SAFEs framework and the information security standards and the legislative requirements. So doing all this, it will actually hopefully, and at the moment it already does, enable future collaborations on confidential data. Next slide, please. So I try to boil it down to the very essence here on this slide. And what you see is what the agreement template includes, and also what the then 7 appendices attached to that include. So the agreement template includes the definitions of terms used in the contract, the services of parties, and that is outlining the tasks and responsibilities of both parties involved, the period of agreement, options for modification and termination, specifications regarding available research data. And that's actually quite important because, for example, here at the UK Data Service, we have at the moment 8,976 data sets, out of which we have 242 controlled data sets, which these contract basically refers to. And so that number is constantly changing. We are constantly adding new data sets to our data catalog. So you need to create your contract in a way that it allows you to change the number and the content of the data that you make available. Also for that, there is a provision in that D5.9 document. Please have a look, and if you have any questions, get back to us. So this is important. Also the occurrence of fees, for example, and fees is another issue. You might now think this relates to fees for using the data or project fees or something like that. That's not the case. Fees here only refers to basically using the technical provision, and that is actually free of cost, at least the way we do it. Now, There are then also 7 appendices, as I said. So they include information on safe room remote desktop services in general. Also the application process for users, which differs obviously from institution to institution. Available research data, details on fees, and then very important relevant legislative texts. Darren has already referred to that in his introduction. I can't go into any details because I don't have many more minutes left, in addition to what I need to say in the coming slides. So if there are any questions, again, we can discuss afterwards. Then there's also a template for a pledge on data secrecy or a secure access agreement. Again, these are sort of suggestions. This is what we use. You can amend it to what is needed for your particular institution. And then obviously all the responsibilities are outlined within the hosting institution. Next slide, please. Okay, so but I would like to also highlight one more thing to the last slide, and that is that the terminology might even be need to be amended. So, for example, it is very important in Germany that you have this phrase faktisch anonymisierte Forschungsdaten. That is something that we would normally not use in our terminology. But again, you then have to make amendments so that it works for both sides. However, because there are all these specifics, we personally came to the conclusion that we suggest to use unilateral agreements. That is the way that you can actually come to agreements, and it works. So this template is ready to use. And as I said, with all the specifics, and you find more when you read it, it is there for your amendments. Now, I would also like to highlight finally the International Secure Data Facility Professionals Network, ISDFPN. Oh no, I need to go back. Thank you.
Sorry, sorry.
This is also one of the outcomes of the SSHOC project. And I would like to highlight, because I mean, the contract template is designed to improve the research infrastructure and to set up new access points, which is fantastic. But this alone is not enough. And here I would like to actually quote Libby, who was the lead of Work Package 5.4 from GESIS, who says infrastructures must, of course, provide essential plumbing, hardware, software, platforms, resources, and so on. However, without adequate human support, too often infrastructures are built but not adopted, embraced but not established, or started but not sustained. And by nature of their specialist niche, secure data professionals tend to be widely distributed, sometimes only a single individual within a large institution. So improving human networks is essential. And I think in yesterday's part of the workshop, we have also heard about colleagues who are the only one in the institution facilitating remote access. So this is actually quite a common problem. Now, ISDFPN was established in March 2022, and it is taken forward in joint collaboration between the UKDA service and GESIS. So I'm co-chairing this together with my colleague Deborah Wiltshire from GESIS. We had initially 22 members. We hold online meetings biannually, and the next meeting will be on the 8th of March 2023. If you're interested, please get in touch. At the moment, we still don't have a website, but that will hopefully change soon. But you can get in touch via this email address, for example. I would actually like to highlight what sort of meetings we had so far. So we have topical meetings, and what is a little bit of a novelty, and I think that actually fits in quite well with this eRImote workshop, is that we try to, as Darren said, there are different types of data to what social sciences data usually are, or at least quantitative social data, which we have in the Secure Lab. So at the moment, we don't really have quali data in the Secure Lab area, and that actually might change in the future. So we actually focus in our meetings on quantitative as well as qualitative aspects. So we had, for example, in our last meeting in September, presentations on data sharing with RDC Quali Service from Germany, which was actually focusing on this qualitative aspect, what I just mentioned. But then we also had, in terms of quantitative, of the quantitative bit of the picture, a presentation on certifying reproducibility with confidential data, first results from the French Cascade CESSDA project. So it is a mix which we decide on the basis of what our members are interested in. And also listening to what was said yesterday, one of the needs is training needs for staff or for users. And there is also another one, which is a discussion about what sort of staff skills are needed and what sort of staff do we have. And there is, for example, an SSDA competency framework out there, which might be helping the discussion. And also we had an aspect on training needs of secure data facility staff, additionally to that. So I would like now to conclude, because I have 2 minutes left, I understand, with the next slide, please. And that is, and here we would like to bring together our two talks. And that's actually the findability of what I call controlled data. So we have open data, safeguarded data, and controlled data. And controlled are these secure use files, as some refer to it, or secure data, or however these are called, confidential data, sensitive data. It's a bit tricky because there are differences in it. I'm fully aware of that, but in whatever way they are used. But I think you understand these are specifically protected data sets. Now, my discussion point here would be, how can I find internationally, where can I search systematically for controlled data in an international context? My hope would have been in the CESSDA data catalog. So I would like to hand back to you, Sharon, to maybe comment on that. Is that an option? Could that be an option to search the CESSDA data catalog in future and find controlled data?
Yes, that's certainly the intention. As I mentioned, the data access filter will just be open data or some restrictions. It'll just be a two-stage flag to start with. And this is basically because in the preparatory work that we did to see how we could bring together access categories for the data, there were a lot of different steps within what we would call restrictions on data, and that might be simple registration, or it might be completing an application form and so on, right through the spectrum of restrictions up to controlled data. So for next year, now that we have the element in DDI 2.6, we hope to introduce the two-stage filter very quickly into the CESSDA data catalogue, and then the next stage, which we'll go to fairly quickly after that, is to look at the restrictions and see if we can break down the restricted, so in inverted commas, category, to make sure that it includes everything across the access spectrum that has some condition attached to it. So yes, we hope certainly within the next couple of years it will be very easy to search specifically for controlled data, and of course then the challenge will be to look at the different conditions that you may need to fulfill to have access to that data across countries. But yes, we hope this will become a lot easier in the CESSDA data catalogue in future.
Thank you. And I think our time is up, but I would still like to mention in 1 second, or maybe two, the International Data Access Network, where basically then we try to establish access points, and where for the first time in February this year, we made controlled UKDA service data sets available, for which, and I think Christina might talk about that later, my colleague from the UKDA service as well, who has negotiated access internationally to these data sets. So now we actually wire these access points, setting up access points in facilities where we have controlled data once we found them. And that's why I also think it's actually quite an important link. So once we know how to systematically find future colleagues and basically then increase the network and really set it up, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.